Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Comic-Based Livestream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about actually kind of a special topic this time. We're going to be going into why it is that you cannot, as an adult, read comic books in public, but also along the way hit a ton of other topics, everything from 18th century economists' thoughts on romantic love and the good life to the Pensacola Blue Wahoos and Neil Peart. So anyway, if this is the sort of thing you like at all, or if it's just an amusing way to spend some time, please hit that like and subscribe button. We're very close to our 500th subscriber, which is kind of a nice round number, and I always like those. But anyway, let's get into it. First, a little bit of comic-based news. We have finally managed to get our code signing certificate renewed, which for any of you guys who aren't involved with writing code for production to the peoples of the world, what it comes down to is this. Because it is bad to install unknown weird things on your computer, the companies that make operating systems and such decide, well, okay, we could have a trusted authority, maybe someone that companies could pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to have a special cryptographic thingy, which every time they write an official release of their software, they could sign it with this cryptographic thingy, and it would say that it came from that company. And just for fun, let's make these things, no matter how much money you've spent, expire in a few years, but it's cool. They can renew them. Well, we've been doing this for 20 years or so, signing our code releases, as everyone does. Because if you don't do it, when you launch any installer on your computer, you've probably seen a note at some point that says, "Warning: this thing you're installing is from an unknown publisher. Will probably destroy your machine, steal all your data, and do bad things." No publisher who does legitimate things wants that to go off when you double click on their installer. So we, of course, have been signing our assemblies, our installers for forever, for the last 20 years. But for whatever reason, when we went to renew our code signer certificate when it expired at the end of April, instead of it being like a 20-minute process of saying, "Oh yeah, here's your current business license and here's who you are, and we know we've already been through the process before, we've validated your business and everything else," instead they decided, yeah, we're going to just basically go squirrely on you for about 2 weeks and not want to do anything. And so for about 2 weeks, we couldn't put out new builds that were signed. And we finally, about 2 hours ago, gotten that resolved. And so we have put out the first interim build in a couple of weeks. If you guys care about these sorts of things and you download it from the latest versions of Comic-Base from the registrations thing, you'll see the new version does a couple of new things. One of them is when you print price labels, you now have the choice, if there's say you have 5 copies in stock, of printing a label for just one of them, like say you just added another copy, or for all 5 at once. That was an option on the ID labels. You can now do it for price labels as well. More importantly, we're playing with a new feature, which I think is really going to help people as they're doing magazines and newspapers in particular. For those sorts of things, you have an option of using either straight numbering, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, just like for comic books, or what we call season style numbering, which is to say, if it was going to be volume 23, issue number 6 of a particular magazine, you would write that as 26, 03 or 003, depending on how many issues were expected to be in each volume. In that way, we didn't have the problem that we encounter with heavy metal when we first indexed that series, going right from the publisher's own notes, from their own. It was on floppy disk. We had to translate from a freaking floppy. They said, okay, here's our list of every issue we've ever done, and we had to unwrap all the million volumes into a sequential number, counting from 1 to, I think, 347 at the time. And only later on did they go, oops, we forgot one. And so we had to somehow insert a new issue between like issues 267 and 268, which of course can't be done. So having learned that mistake the very painful way with heavy metal, back once upon a time, when we decided to take on magazines and newspapers, which are very, very frequently do not have sequential numbers at all, but merely volume numbers and a certain number of issues per volume, we made, I think, the very wise decision of adopting generally season style numbering, where if it's the New York Times and you're talking about volume 173, issue number 53, it's issue number 173053. So anyway, what we've done as a check to the latest version of Copybase is when you create new issues for magazines, we've made it so it looks at the periodicity, how often it's published, and allows you to say, okay, I'm going to create now for my new magazine, say Mix Magazine. I just entered in. It went 27 volumes. I want issues, 1 through 270, 2705, which would be volume 27, number 5. And because it knows that it's published, say, monthly, it would know that, okay, that means there's 12, 12 issues by default per volume, and that we're going to auto increment the volumes as we go, and we're going to put the notes in which say this is volume 26, number 5, number 27, and so forth, and do all that just when you create the new volumes. The experiment looks like it worked out pretty well. We are going to be building that out in the magazines and taking it into newspapers where it will definitely be useful because it will save you a ton of spreadsheet work if you're entering those sorts of things in. Anyway, so look for that one. It's not a fully built out feature yet, but if you want to play with it, it will work in certain circumstances, and it tries to intuit whether you're using sequential numbering or volume style numbering, and you'll see it right when you create new magazine volumes, whether or not you want to use season style numbering as a new checkbox in the right by the issue number. So anyway, that's a new thing. Look for that one, and there will be, of course, new things as we go. We are pulling into the season to do the next major version of Copybase, codename Archangel, and we'll be taking signups for that effort in the next few weeks. Not right now. We're still doing behind the scenes sorts of things to kind of clear the decks down, but when that does happen, and if you're interested in being part of the early dev group on that one to kind of see all the builds as they come out, I will put out the announcement. You can send me a note letting me know that you're interested in signing up for it. All right, so with all that said, I want to say hi to everyone, and then we'll get into the big topic. So anyway, Jesse Comics First Now is out here from the Pacific Northwest, and looks like everyone is getting a nice break in the weather. Nice to see everyone out there. Hey, Mike Beam again from out in Washington State. Fred Sloda out in West Virginia, memory serves. And let's see, is this a free comic book day books plus barcode scanner? Oh my God, how did I ever live before? Yeah, no, that makes a world of difference. I was just entering our own free comic book day books in when they came to me. The books in our little ecosystem, they start out in California where they get indexed and inventoried and put out for all you guys. And then at that point, the books get shipped over to me where I actually enter them into our own collection. Then they get posted for sale on Atomic Avenue. And just being able to blaze through those 48 different free comic book day offerings this year with a barcode scanner, now have to, fuss around trying to figure out what the title and issue was. Man, does that save a lot of time. Okay, let's see here. Let's see here. Fred also had a question about how long before cover ID by Comic Scan. We'll hit that one in a second. Rob Weinberg, welcome from Toledo. Greg Hecht, our wrench mensch is in the house, and it also looks like the gardening is coming as well. Scruffy, welcome. I'm not sure where you're from, but feel free to say hi. Hello, Tyler T. Ed Bill Yachts joining us here, and okay, let's see. What? Is the next version of CB going to sprout metal wings and neurotoxin-laced flechette feathers? God, I hope not. But the way things are going with me lately, I wouldn't be surprised. All right. So anyway, let's handle the one question I got here, and I finally figured out how to use the starred feature for comments, so I can actually look at things ahead of time and note them here. So let me pull this one up here. So Fred asked, how long before we have comic ID by cover scan, which might be asked, in jest or maybe not. Ironically, we did a test on this a while ago, just as almost like a tech test to say, well, would it be possible if you had a picture of a comic book to compare it to, it's called the fast Fourier transforms of other comic books that are in the art library, and figure out what issue it is? And the answer is largely yes. So it's basically the same kind of idea that Shazam uses when it's trying to figure out what music you've got, playing on the record, on the radio, and in the coffee shop you're at, or whatever else. It basically, it's computed a signature, a thumbprint, typically based off of a thing called the fast Fourier transform of the song, and it compares those instances of what's hearing now to say, do I see the same kind of harmonic signature when I am scanning through the different phases of my entire art library? Yeah, and you can do this sort of thing, with your scan versus our scan. It's not comparing exact pixels, but it kind of says, well, does it feel like the same book? Because we know the sizes are going to be different, the color placement's going to be different. Your book may have nicks and matches and things like that. But if you're looking at kind of like the underlying pattern of the book, it is possible to kind of compute a bit of a signature for the whole thing and see, okay, is this thing that version or that version? And the answer is basically you can get pretty close. You can identify it, with certainty most of the time. The sorts of things that throw it off, obviously, are variants that differ only by a cover, a color, or by the placement or not placement of certain graphic elements. Like for instance, it does very badly for comic shop variants of different Godzilla comic books. Its recognition rate on those was terrible because the covers were like 96% identical. If your cover is damaged in any way, if the scan's hinky in any way, obviously the recognition goes down. It works, but realistically, the reason we haven't done anything with it, even though we could, is because for all modern comic books, the barcode has just works so much better. Barcode is like a bang zap kill. In microseconds it gets you straight to the comic book in question almost all the time. Whereas doing an FFT analysis and comparing it to the library takes quite a bit of time. And at that point, you're like, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this other thing, and honestly, not much of a bang for your buck in terms of training most people who have some idea how comic books work, in terms of getting to the right comic book, as opposed to just beep a barcode in and take them instantly to the right place. So it's something, like I say, we looked into it. It was interesting, but we're probably not going to pursue it anytime quickly unless something changes about the whole thing. All right, so let me see here. And hello, Andrea, for the whole thing. All right, and then obviously strange banter in the chat. Okay, moving on. All right, so and I wrote out notes to myself. I'm just going to warn everyone here. It's like um, so the topic, as discussed, was and let me go ahead and put the graphic up on the thing right now. Get the right one here. I had actually asked the artist for why adults can't read comics in public, as opposed to why can't adults read comics in public. It's pretty much the same idea, but that's in a way that's the teaser question for the whole thing, and there's a short, there's a one word answer which I think I'm going to leave off right now. The slightly more cryptic but I think interesting answer comes down to if because the picture on the left was not posed and the picture on the right was posed. And then let's get into what that all means in terms of, the ability to, read comics in public and so much more. But anyway, having given the answer to the whole thing, and anyone who's wants to into the first 13 minutes of the podcast and avoid the long and rambling discussion that follows, that there you have your answer. But now let's get into the long and winding road which got me to this whole discussion. So this last weekend, I've got a place down in Florida, and which finally is in enough construction shape that you can actually kind of go down there and just sort of enjoy it. We went down there, planed a couple of doors, cleaned up some things, fixed some construction dust, and then my wife and I actually got a chance to have the weekend and just enjoy ourselves for once. Head out to the beach, taking a ball game, all that stuff. And is we're driving down there. Went to the Pensacola Blue Wahoos, which was the minor league AA team down there. Which, man, by the way, if you ever want to know the difference between a AA and a AAA team, oof, boy, it was like some of the fielding was, let's say, it was pretty rough. But anyway, so while we were down at the game, a couple of interesting things happened beside the roach race. And by the way, the roach race, if you guys have ever been to minor league baseball, one of the things that makes it just so adorable is they do lots and lots of silly things in between innings to try to keep the crowd interested as they're eating hot dogs and guzzling beers and doing all the things that Americans do at ball games. And one of the things that the Pensacola Blue Wahoos do is apparently a tradition around the sixth season where they have some employees, a teenager who's fleet of foot, dressed up in a roach costume, like, because I guess they got a lot of roaches in Pensacola. So this person's dressed up as a giant cockroach, and they go this cockroach goes screaming across the ball field headed towards the outside, the far left field, and then right on his heels is infinity children, like just every child in the known universe is running like a crazy person after this teenager in a roach costume. He's running for his life, and the guy makes it for safety, disappears into the dugout area, and then but you're just watching this thing with your mouth open and say, what the hell am I watching here? And the kids just keep coming and coming and coming. It was like just infinity children. Eventually, they got to the point where like little toddlers are on the field and they had to be scooped up by their parents and run off because it was so many people. Weirdest thing ever. But in addition to the roach race, as interesting things happen, the Blue Who's game, three things of note came up, which kind of form the parts of this puzzle. One is on the way to the thing. I was listening to Neil Peart. He used to be the drummer for Rush. He unfortunately died a couple years ago, but he was also, in addition to being a hell of a drummer, was also quite a gifted writer and used to write all these very interesting, like kind of like road monologue, books. It's like, and he wrote I was listening to one called Roadshow. He's talking about, motorcycling around between gigs in the European tour of their R30 tour, and visiting the Carnegie Castle in Scotland, just absolutely marveling at the library. And just, I mean, this guy is like, I absolutely admire his what the guy can do behind the drum kit. But he's just sitting there just gushing about, like, I cannot believe this library, this magnificent, set of books and the grand accoutrements and everything else like that. That was, out of all the amazing things, the Carnegie Castle, that was the thing that impressed him the most. Another thing that was interesting is, while waiting in between the innings on the whole game was rain delayed by about an hour. There was a giant QR code on the screen came up. And if you scanned it, and I didn't bother the first time, but after you see enough time, you're bored enough, you get out your phone, you kind of scan it, and it took you to a special digital comic book of. I guess they were doing a tie-in with the Guardians of the Galaxy. They were, with Marvel, they were wearing special jerseys, and the Blue Wahoos had a special digital comic book they'd commissioned called Defenders of the Diamond, which it was, I think it was Fico Placentia, I believe, was the artist and all the thing. It was, it was up to professional standards. It looked pretty damn good on my phone as I was, leafing through it. It's the sort of thing that, special purpose commission comic books. But it was interesting that you only got this thing if you had been at the show. So I have a digital comic book, which I don't know, 1,000 other people probably have. I'm not sure if they did other, ball games around the country, but as I know it, you can commission the use of the Marvel characters for use in these sort of things for a couple of grand, and that you typically would involve even printing the comic book. Here, they bypassed the whole need for that and just did the whole thing digitally. So it's a kind of interesting thing, and I'll be curious. I have some thoughts about how the idea of these kind of on the spot personal properties that only happen at live events might play out in the future. We'll get into that later. And then finally, I watched the beer concessions, and we may or may not get into why that was very interesting at this park. But as I was getting out of the park, I was just, you get a long drive back from Pensacola to Destin, where we're staying, and I was talking to my wife, and I was saying, gosh, I was thinking about the library that, Neil Peart, toured and everything else. I'm thinking, it used to be when, you were really into something. If you're really into books, you're really into movies, you're really into comic books, you're really into art, there'd be artifacts of that thing, laying around your life. Just if you went to my house for, or you saw my dorm room for like 15 seconds, you would have, just by looking around, you would have suddenly about a dozen things you could talk to me about, because you'd see the fact that, you'd see my CD collection laying around, you'd see posters on my wall, there'd be all these things that just as a natural impact, effect of being into a certain kind of material, the books on my shelf, whatever else, there'd be about a dozen things you could talk to me about just from just knowing me for, a few seconds, just looking around my environment. And it's really interesting these days that that's been taken from us. When Spotify came around and gave you all the songs in the world, it kind of left you with none of the songs. Suddenly nobody has a CD collection anymore. You have all the songs, but in a way you have none of them, and there's nothing that tells me what songs are yours. Same thing goes with books. I for the first time in my life, I met adults out here who was like, yeah, me and my wife, and we're like, "Oh, so what kind of books you guys read?" We don't have books. You don't have books? Yeah, no, we don't have books. It No books. It's like you have the stupidest discussion with them ever, and you're trying to figure, are they joking? Are they subliterate? I mean, these people of the world, and no, just when we read things, we read them on Kindles, or we, borrow them from Kindle Unlimited or whatever thing is. But as a result, in their whole house, they have no books. It just defies the comprehension if you're from the generation I'm from. I mean, as a Gen Xer, you're like, "The what?" Because it used to be the easiest way to get to know anyone was, stare at their bookshelf, stare at their CD collection, then you'd know, everything you need to know about them, all just about. At the very least, you'd have a million things to talk to about them. So, and the same thing goes for other things in life. You don't have a big set of VHS tapes. Most people don't even have DVDs anymore. What they like watching, unless you saw their history from Netflix or something like that, you'd have no idea. It's always safe to assume that everyone's seen the same blockbusters you have. But beyond that, it's like, do they have a taste for quirky German horror films? Do they have a taste for weird rom coms? Whatever the thing is, you're never going to know about it looking around their place. All these digital artifacts, it isn't just that they provide you all the convenience of the world of being able to see everything, but they also take something from you in that they take away your ability to brand who you are, so people get to know you. And so I was asking my wife as we're driving back, I said, you know, what's replaced? We used to have these magnificent libraries, like they're talking about, with Carnegie's library up in Scotland. It used to be like, it would be a physical place in your house. They would say, hey, look, I'm a man of culture, and these are the kinds of things I like. These are interesting editions I own. What's replaced that? And her response was, hmm, yeah, I think a lot of virtue signaling, a lot of politics. And I'm like, you try thought on for a minute, knock around your head and thinking, huh, think she might be right. As had a chance to muse on this for the next several days. I got a chance to think beyond it, and the answer is actually a little more complicated than all that. I mean, certainly we do talk way more about politics and virtue signaling and let people know exactly how good a person we are because of the things that we believe and the sorts of posts that we will like to show that we're on the same team. We will do that sort of thing way more than I think people did in times past. But the other thing we'll do is, if you're a member of any of the social media type things, is you do a lot of signaling about your own life through your own posts. I mean, here's a picture of my food. I'm the kind of person who goes to cool restaurants like this. Here's a picture of my adorable children because I'm the sort of person who has adorable children who take part in plays like this. Here's a picture of this event that I went to, showing that I'm a person of culture. Here's a picture of whatever the thing is. And if you actually look and say, like, from a sociological, standpoint, what percentage of Facebook status updates, like what's the real message here? I mean, are you saying I went to the last performance of Hamilton? Are you saying that because, you want to know if anyone wanted to join you for beers after the show? Or is it really just want to say, I'm the kind of person who goes to Hamilton and I'm the kind of person who got tickets? Honestly, I think probably the vast majority of Facebook status updates, certainly Instagram updates, things like that, are there to tell a story of my fabulous, wonderful life, starring me. Um, you know, and basically tell everybody else, what tribe are you in? What kind of status do you have? And reinforce the idea that you're a cool person. And it's really one of the reasons that I kind of just couldn't handle social media. And if you look for me on social media, you'll largely find that I'm a ghost. There's a couple of official, iFlack comic based kinds of things that come out every week, when we do a live stream. Beyond that, yeah, no, pretty much I just pulled way back. Another problem with social media for me personally is I found out it's weirdly both addictive because it kind of feeds you this nonstop set of dopamine hits about, like, aha, here's this person who thinks exactly what I think. But it also has an algorithm set up that says, look, I'm going to feed you things that you interact with the most. And the thing that they found out that you interact with the most is the things that you hate. It's the things that piss you off. And as a result, the algorithm that Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., tends to feed you, it tends to feed you lots of people who are essentially getting under your skin. And especially when it's on Facebook and it comes from friends. And a lot of times they're going way out there because they're in this mode where they need to show off themselves and show off, how good they are or whatever they are. They're going much more than they would if you were just sitting around having a beer together. They're putting themselves out in a place where, like, oh, look, see, I'm a member of this tribe who's one of the good guys because I do blah. And when team is not the team you're on, it just, I don't know, it makes you think, Jesus Christ, what the hell, man? I used to think this guy was, pretty okay. And why is he going on this big, rant about, that he's on team whatever, that it isn't my team because he feels like he needs to pose. I mean, if we were just having beers together, it would never come up. We'd be talking about the books we like, the comics we like, the art we like, the shows we've seen. We would talk about anything else other than what team I'm on, because the answer would be we're both on team fans of the things we love, and so because ironically, the fact that we've taken away the physical forms that allow us to identify, other members of team things I love, by the things, the art we've got, we're left in this weird situation where I think a lot of people go way out in order to prove that they're on some team that someone cares about. They go way more into politics and virtue signaling than they ever would otherwise, and it leaves us all, I think, in a very strange place. So I was thinking about that whole thing. I was thinking about, like, well, gosh, if that's true, what do you do about it? And and so then kind of, got a lot of time driving, got a lot of time at the beach the next day, and I was sort of turning my, thoughts around to the idea of, like, well, why are people doing all this? I mean, it seems like a lot of work, and my thoughts turn back to, of course, as they do, as you're thinking about things that people love and you're looking for romance and in pursuit of the higher meanings in life. I, of course, think back to 18th century economist Adam Mill, the guy who wrote on the theory of moral sentiments and on an inquiry into the understanding of the wealth of nations, which, those hot best, selling classics of all time, which I'm sure we all have on our nightstands, except they're probably in Kindle form now, right? um, but Adam Mill, a number of years ago, I don't know if the guy got it for me as a joke or not, but a guy sent me a book, was talking about Adam Mill on love, I'm sorry, Adam Smith on love, and I'm thinking, this is a joke, right? Adam Smith, he's talking about monetary policy and the rights of personal property and 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 free trade and so forth. This guy is going to tell me about what it means to live a happy and a happy life. And as it turns out, it was actually one of the more on point books I've ever seen on the subject. Because basically, for Adam Smith, it came down to two things. What does man want in life in order to be happy? He wants basically to be loved and to be lovely. And by that, it means that you want people to like you. You want to be a member of their tribe. You want them to feel affiliation with you. You want them to regard you well. But also, you want to feel like you deserve it. In other words, you yourself possess the sort of moral goodness that makes you worthy of love. So, to get an idea of the difference between the two, think about someone like Kurt Cobain, right? I mean, here's a guy who could go up on stage any night of the week and get absolute adoration from the crowd. He's practically his own cult leader at the height of his popularity. People throwing things down night and day, and at the end he came home, ate a shotgun. The other guy who absolutely pisses me off, the Michael Hutchence from In Excess, who, because again, as a child of the '80s, I'm sitting there going, like, wait a minute, you're a good-looking dude with the hottest band on the planet. You guys have money like you can't believe. You have hot and cold running women. I mean, you write great songs. You look good. It's just everything about you is great. And you go and you hang yourself. And then while you're hanging yourself, you're even doing something kind of squirrely. But it's like what it came to in the end for both these guys is that even though they were loved, they did not themselves feel lovely. In other words, they thought, look, my life is shit. I'm kind of a piece of crap, and fuck it, what's the point? So anyway, yeah. So that's the two ends. I think. I think Adam Smith got it right when he said those are the two ends of feeling like you're worth it as a human being. And when you look around at what people do on Facebook, especially when you go through, what people did during COVID, I think there was a guy named Zuby who put a series of tweets out. And if you want to Google them up, it's worth doing. Just Google up Zuby, Z-U-B-Y, COVID. And it was like, here are the lessons I learned the hard way through COVID. And it was bracing. I'm just going to say. And one of them was basically, it comes down to is like, yeah, when push comes to shove, most people want to fit in more than they want anything else. In terms of doing what's right, being true to friends, whatever else, they want to fit in and be part of the herd more than they want anything. And it's grim. It feels kind of black pill to me, but I think he's right. In terms of like, we forget as human beings how very, very powerful the herd instinct is until something like COVID reminds us. I'm like, you see otherwise sane people chasing people down in grocery stores and slugging them while screaming spit in their face because they say, because you're not wearing a mask. I'm like, what part of any of this seems sane to these people? And if you took everyone out of the craziness of COVID, I mean, it was like a Twilight Zone episode, I think something about Maple Street, where it's like you could take the absolute perfectly bucolic suburban neighborhood full of good neighbors get along just fine with each other, but put them under enough stress and suddenly they're just crazed, and the tribe identity that drives them is absolutely the animating principle behind everything they're doing. People, you would never imagine that people like this, you think it was good people, could be driven in ways to act so crazily based pretty much on just the need to belong to the tribe that they identified with. It was so powerful. With that said, so I'm, get into this one. So Adam Smith, yes. Which then brings me to fashion. So in a world where we don't have the ability to flag to other people what we're all about, because you've taken away the physical artifacts of the things we love, in a world where as a result we wind up talking way too much about the things we hate, about the things that animate us, the people who are on the wrong side, the people who are just desperate threats to our way of life, and all the other crazy stuff that politicians just love. I mean, it's in this kind of world, what are the people who, again, I assume 99.8% of most people are kind of decent people if you get to know them over a beer. But why do we act so crazy? When we're online. But also, what are the people left to do to just kind of let other people know that, look, I'm a member of this tribe or that tribe, and you could get along with me if you wanted to. It brings you to fashion, because it's one of the few things you could do to actually say, well, look, I'm this kind of guy. We were having beers over at the Destin Brew Works, the day before, and as you would do after a long drive, you're sitting down having a beer, and you're looking around for people to kind of chat with on a lovely sunny day. And there's a guy wearing a College Station, a Texas T-shirt, the Aggies, Texas A&M. I was like, oh hey, my brother went around there. It's like, so you went chatting a little bit about Texas and things like that. And then someone came around with a dog, and we've had a dog with us, so we're talking about dogs. And towards the end, we wound up closing down the brewery, just chatting with some people who were strangers up until then, based on one person had a dog, one person had a T-shirt, and then you kind of work your way in from there. But fashion does, either through the very obvious things, like a logo on your shirt, with the fact that you've got wearing this a T-shirt from a favorite rock band or a brand you like, or a sports team you follow, whatever else. It does give you a way of saying, look, this is at least one thing about my personality that I think would not be particularly confrontational. Usually, I mean, most people don't wear really confrontational T-shirts. Some people do. I've seen a lot of them in Florida. But it's like, here's a hook to get to know me a little bit. Here's a little something to say who I am. And one thing that's funny about fashion, especially as a guy, is women it feels like they're born as pros about fashion. They get from a very early age that fashion is about connoting status. It's about connoting, the fact that you are, you're a member of a certain clan. That you're whether you're one of the queen bees, when you're one of the cool girls, one of the rocker chicks, the whatever else. I mean, whatever the whole thing, they get that. It feels like from birth. Men, on the other hand, we tend to be like completely clueless louts when it comes to fashion. Matter of fact, we'll be the people when like our parents are trying to get us dressed for church, or else we'll be fussing with our hair. I'll be like, no, mom, leave my hair alone. Whatever the thing is. And I think most of us tend to carry that well into our teens and sometimes beyond, where, as soon as you get out of a uniform, most guys don't are absolutely lost. If they know that the uniform for my job is, well, I wear a button-up Oxford shirt and a pair of slacks and a belt, and it's like, okay, I'm going to wear that every single day. Same thing goes with if it's a polo shirt, if it's jeans and a t-shirt, whatever the thing is. We're happy when you slide us into a uniform and we can just go to work, because it seems like a lot. We would like to, let people know that we are a member of, team whatever. We're professional, we're doing our thing. But most men don't have the kind of sense for the fine points of fashion to really realize what they're saying with all the things they're doing. And honestly, for their own good, it's usually best to stick them in a uniform and just kind of move on with life. But the funny thing is, I learned later on, I partly because, I'm a designer, and of course it always comes from, as soon as you sit there and say, hey Peter, you're a little light in the loafers. Yeah, that is always the hack on any guy who has any opinion about fashion. But one thing I learned, you know, sometime in my teens or 20s, is that there's no opting out of fashion. You can't not. I mean, you always think it. Look, hey man, if I just roll out of bed, put the first thing on that I can see, grab it, and just go down to work, you think you're saying nothing about yourself. But no, you're always saying something about yourself. The only time you're not saying something about fashion is if someone literally dressed you. Um, but I mean, if you're indicating that that you're a slob, you don't care, that you're messy, that you're high status, you're low status, whatever else, you can never not say something about the clothes you wear. Now, I mean, look, part of the shtick of doing YouTube stuff, right, which I'm doing right now, is, and also part of being a guy is you don't fuss up too much, right? I mean, not I'm not doing a makeup video, right? But I mean, it's not considered cool whatsoever to really go, dressed to the nines for your YouTube video. You always have to make it look like, hey man, I'm just a guy with a microphone. We're just talking here, right? But I mean, seriously, do you guys think I didn't consider, what I look like before I come on the microphone? I mean, I know you try to make it look, because you're like a guy, you try to make it like, nah, I just rolled out of bed. That's why, of course, I'm wearing product in my hair to make it look like I just happened to roll out of bed and, and didn't do this right before the show. It isn't like right before the show I didn't do last looks and make sure my camera was focused and where else, and that, it was pointing at a desk that was relatively clear, which had somewhat interesting pop culture geek artifacts on the back of it, which aren't, which would hopefully indicate that I'm kind of an interesting guy. I mean, these are things that in my life that I do love, that I get to show off, but hopefully aren't off-putting to anyone in particular. I check the framing on the camera to make sure that I'm not showing too much from the garbage around my office, with boxes and shipping materials and other things that wouldn't look good on camera. I mean, everyone has to always choose the frame. It's you can't not. The same thing goes from like the shirt you put on in the morning. Even if you're trying to just wear a rando t-shirt, it's like, here's the one I'm wearing today. It's like, and yes, if it's 5 minutes of thought or not, there is, 5 seconds of thought or not, there is a certain amount of thought that always goes into, well, what am I wearing today? I mean, most people aren't going to put on the shirt that had that mustard stain on it from last night, when they were eating the pretzel, because they don't want to look like a schmuck. Similarly, you're not going to, put on something with a really strong political statement if you know that you're not walking into a political rally for exactly those kind of guys. It's, you're going to choose whether or not, is this, am I walking today? If I'm going to a nightclub, I'm not going to dress the same way I would be doing if I was going into a job interview. I'm certainly not going to do the same, outfit as if I was going out to, park to play with my kids. I mean, you always are dressing for a role. It's as ministry would say in their song, every day is always Halloween. There's no getting around it. And the best thing you can ever do as a guy is, get the idea that you're always in costume, no matter what you're doing. even when you pretend you're not. And the thing is, it feels like every teenager has to learn this one the hard way by being horrifically in the wrong costume at some point and then realizing, oh, wait, I do actually have to dress the part because I don't have a chance to not give a message. So anyway, so, with that said, sorry, it's a, particular story here I was gonna share. It's like, so for instance, Silicon Valley, where I used to come from, um, we make a big point of pretending like we're just normal folks. We're geeks here, right? We get jeans, T-shirts, but us guys, we are so unpretentious as compared to those East Coast guys. It's just us in a T-shirt, and if we're doing very, very well, a $400 pair of jeans, along with our $300, tennis shoes or whatever the thing is. But they'll be tennis shoes. They won't be Oxfords or anything like that. No, because that's the costume for the East Coast. And the way you show you're cool on the West Coast is that, nah, we don't do anything like that. We're the casual guys because we're all about the creativity and the business. We're not about posing for each other. Of course, we're posing if you know how to read the pose. Funny thing is, I used to work out in a place by Sand Hill Road, which, if you guys know Silicon Valley, it's where Xerox Park was headquartered, but more importantly, up the street was where all the venture capital firms were. And so, just my comings and goings every once in a while, you'd see different people coming in and out of different coffees, shops and things like that in the area, and you could just tell basically looking across the coffee shop, okay, that guy's with a startup. That guy's startup just went public. That guy there is pitching to a startup because he's actually from the East Coast, dressed up in the East Coast business suit. He hasn't figured it out yet. You got to take off the tie, you got to take off the blazer, and so forth. The guys who dressed the schlubbiest were actually the guys who were from the CEOs who were their firms just got funded. But yeah, it was funny, but there was a very, very involved dress code for the entire thing, and the locale very specific. So, for instance, when I was in running a consulting team up in San Francisco, I would also have meetings down at companies like eBay, down the South Bay in San Jose. So I might start my day out in San Francisco talking to Genentech or something like that, and I'd be dressed up because the San Francisco costume much more East Coast, right? Now I'd have my blazer on, have my tie, my Oxford shirt, whatever else, and then if you knew you had a meeting that afternoon with eBay, the blazer went into the back of your car. Sometimes I had a spare T-shirt, which depending on where you were going to, depending on the company, because some companies fancy themselves kind of LA hip, some of them weren't, in which case it might be blazer plus T-shirt. Sometimes it was polo shirt, sometimes it was Oxford, but there'd be basically like one or two items for costume change you keep in the back of your car just as you're driving, down the thing, and you get a chance to, pull off the corner of a parking lot before the meeting. You do a quick little costume change before the next meeting, and this is for guys just a tech consultant. But the whole point we were thinking there is like we had to look like we fit into the world of our clients, and so it was important to have those kind of things available when you were doing this, the switch. All right, well, so what were we trying? Oh, by the way, the one fashion tip I had written for myself is, by the way, if you ever find yourself in, Silicon Valley or in a lot of other situations in the modern world, black jeans work almost everywhere. Just there's your little fashion tip for the day. So, if you wore blue jeans in San Francisco, would not fly. Black jeans can dress up a look, and you'll get away with it. Anyway, with that said, what are we dressing for when we're dressing, for fashion? Well, we're trying to connote two different things. We're trying to connote our tribe. What group do we belong as part of, or which groups, right? And we're also trying to indicate our status. And so we're trying to say, look, I'm in one of many different groups. I'm an engineer. I'm also a Silicon Valley guy. I'm also a guy at that point in my 40s who was working in tech, who had a certain kind of outlook or whatever else. You seem to we want to indicate that you were the kind of guy that other people would get along with in that sort of thing. If I dressed like I was from a different culture, there'd be a little bit of a barrier there. It would get in the way of doing the business, and so you didn't want to do it. But you also wanted to indicate that, again, you were of a certain status. You weren't going to dress like if I dressed in really, really upscale stuff. It'd be like, "Who's the high-priced East Coast consultant guy?" No, not that wasn't our brand as a consulting firm. So we were gonna dress a little better than client, but not way better. There were other consultant companies who came in at much higher price points who were dressed way better than their own clients, and it showed little things. Um, but you want to say, look, this is who I am, and also, give people a few hooks to talk to you. I mean, to say, look, oh, hey, I noticed you've got, whatever, little indicators who you were. The laptop you would choose, the watch you would wear, the pen you would use to write notes with. All were little things to indicate that you were the kind of, the right kind of guy for what they're looking for. Oh, by the way, another power tip: if you guys are ever in the consulting business, although everyone in business consulting or tech consulting is always trying to figure out how to have the coolest, the lightest, the most bitchin' Apple product, that is always a safe bet if you're in any of the creative-ish fields. But if there's always the time in the meeting where everyone's sitting around on their cool Apple laptop taking notes, the winning look, the power look of all those ones, no laptop at all, good little notebook, not 8.5 by 11, something smaller, really good pen, manual notes, put it down. When you're not taking notes, just kind of put it down with a knowing smile after having made a little inscription on something. That guy, whoever that guy is who did that, that guy won the meeting. Everyone else looked like they were checking their eBay, auctions. So just, yeah, tips for consultants in terms of status signaling in Silicon Valley. But anyway, the other thing we want to do, and to quote Steely as, like, we want, in addition to saying that we're worthwhile people to talk to, is we're looking to give people indicators of who we are, to, as they say, share the things we know and love with those of our kind. It's the sort of things that, if this was the 80s and we were all 20-year-olds and we were all, into bands, think about a world where the fashion we'd be wearing would be leather jackets with 8,000 pins from all the bands that we were into, right? That would tell you what kind of people we were. Are we a punker, a new wave, or a rocker, or whatever else, a mod kid, and so forth. We don't do that anymore with that sort of thing. Some people do it with stickers on the back of their laptop. That's a pretty, that play only works on a certain age group on the whole thing. But we're trying essentially with all this stuff. I mean, it's so involved when you look at all the fine points of what we're doing with all this, is we're just trying to find people that are kind of like us that we can chat with. It's like we don't mean to overwhelm any about it. We just want to find our guys. So with that said, we want both status and friendship. And one thing that we'll do as people is we'll sacrifice some status in the larger group, right? So, we're willing to look like a little bit of a dork if it gives us more if it makes us rise in the status for our lesser group. And this kind of, brings us into the world of, comic guys and so forth. But just think about just guys versus, guys hanging out with each other as opposed to just guys out in the business world, say, for instance, right? Like if I'm going around into a business meeting, the whole thing, I don't want to look like a schmuck. I'm going to dress nice. I'm going to, try brush my teeth, make sure my nails are clean, do my hair, do things like that. But if I'm sitting there after work and I'm with my guys, I found my tribe, we're having beers with my guys, at that point the tie comes off if you ever had it on. You'll sit there, you'll make rougher jokes, you'll goof around, you won't do high status behaviors, at least as interpreted by the outer group, because what you really want is you want to bond and become a high status guy within your group, within your very local tribe. You'll bring that up about, here are the things I'm really knowledgeable about. If you're talking about geek stuff, you'll be like, oh yeah, here's the latest blah blah blah, the news on this thing that's going on or that thing that's going on. You'll try to impress people with, like, oh hey, did you see the new thing that I just was hip to, or the new meme that I just did. You'll talk about all these sorts of very insular behaviors in order to kind of rise within the smaller group. But and if so, you might give up some status in the big group, but you don't want to commit suicide with it, which kinda is where we get to the answer to the question. So in a world where we all have the things we love that animate us, that make us really happy to be part of the human experience. Again, the art, the books, the movies, the theater tickets, whatever it is that we go to. And for us, comic books, right? We all, for whatever reason, whatever's wrong with us, we love comic books. But why is it that we can't read them in public? And the reason it comes down to is because it's status suicide. It's we can know of like amongst ourselves if it's a closed world, if we're talking at the user group meeting for comic base, or if we're in the comic shop or in one of these safe spaces where the normies aren't going to walk in, at that point then we rise in stature by knowing exactly how many iterations Spider-Man's going through and whether Miles Morales needs to, should he even be called Spider-Man, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about whether the high evolutionary, doing Rocket Raccoon was a good move for the latest Guardians of the Galaxy thing or not. We'll get into all of it, right? And we know that if we took the same conversation and we did it in a bar in front of normies, they'd be like, "Who are the freak show?" It's like at best case we would look like complete geeks out of nowhere. And God help us if we actually opened up an actual floppy comic book and in front of the bar and try to chat up the woman next to you and say, "Hey, have you seen the latest Guardians of the Galaxy?" Yeah, that yeah, yeah, no one would have ever been shot down faster than anything. Even the somewhat autistic folks that we all tend to be, even we get that this is not gonna get us anywhere. And so, getting back to my original comment about, why is it that you can't read comic books in public? It kinda comes back to this. The picture on the left was not staged. That's a real picture. It's 7, 8-year-old kids maybe just being kids. They're just doing the things they love. They don't really care. They're not certainly the guy is not conscious about their status. They like pictures of Captain Midnight, they're gonna read a Captain Midnight. The girl likes girls romances, she's reading girls romances. Picture on the right, phony as a $3 bill. That is a publicity picture from Read Comics in Public, which, which was an effort which they had. It's actually people were trying to mainstream the idea that, well, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we could do the thing we love in public and not have it not be status suicide? And so I think they took a page from gay pride events, which thought that, okay, well, we're gay, and before gay pride as a movement came around, the idea was, well, look, if what you do by yourself, not my business, but just group it, don't scare the horses, do it, this thing, and just don't tell me about it, and and maybe then we can kind of ignore you and get along. And it became sort of a thing saying, well, no, hell with that. I want to be who I am, and walk around with my boyfriend, or if I'm a girl, my girlfriend, and it's not your business. And damn it, I'm going to do it in public. I'm going to do it out and proud, as they say. I think there's a lot of the Black Pride stuff from the '60s had the same kind of origin, saying, "Look, I'm not going to act like you. I'm going to act like me, and we're going to do it, and we're going to re-change the norm. We're going to move that along." And I think people thought, well, okay, it worked for gay pride, it worked for Black pride. Why not try it for Read comic books? So August 28th, if you guys had never heard of this, starting back in, I believe, 2012, is supposed to be Read Comic Books in Public Day. Of course, doesn't actually work. The site, if you look at the people who are doing sort of thing, it's full of a couple of staged pictures of the odd geek boys who look natural as, oh dear lord, it just looks like the sort of thing that just doesn't ever happen. Best case, it's like an old guy reading comic books with his daughter, which, people look at that and say, "Oh, that's so cute. You're reading a Spider-Man with your granddaughter." It doesn't feel like it feels like you're basically doing something childish with your child, and that's fine because you're a loving dad. That's fine. But if you're like a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old in the dating pool and you're whipping open the latest issue of Black Panther and being like, "Yeah, really digging the art on this one," and you're doing that in some place where a girl could see you, Lord, that is not gonna be a great look for almost anyone. I mean, the funny thing is, if you actually do find the person that is a great look for, you guys will bond like nobody's business. But for 99% of the girls who walk by, it's death, because and here we get down to in here, by the way, sexism and generalization alert, the whole 9 yards, I'm gonna go for it. Because and so on all this stuff, the standard disclaimers for what follows, it should be your mileage may vary. and not all people are like this. I'm talking generalizations. I'm not talking about everybody, but I'm going to talk about hopefully things that we all kind of recognize as sort of like the way the world's working right now, whether it should work that way or not. At which point I'm just going to go for it. So anyway, enough disclaimer, enough trigger warning. If you're triggered, feel free to sign off. No, it's cool. Um, but when you're 8 years old and you like Spider-Man, you're like, hey, I'm gonna have a big picture of Spider-Man on my shirt. I'm gonna read Spider-Man comic books, and that's cool. And other kids who like Spider-Man will find me because I'm the kid with the Spider-Man comic books. And that's great when you're 8. And then girls come along. So yeah, the short version for why can't you read comic books in public? The very short version is girls. And the reason is because the dominant genre for comic books in America, the Western world, really, is superheroes. It's when people think comic books, if you just say comic book to any normie on the street, they're going to think of Batman or Wonder Woman or Superman or whatever the latest thing was and so forth, and they're going to think a number of things at the same time. Oh yeah, those are cool. Yeah, I saw that movie. That was a lot of fun. I know that character. And they'll talk about, everyone knows what Spider-Man does, everyone knows what Superman does, everyone knows what Batman does. They don't mind having the character around. They think it's a little weird if you got the action figure, but maybe if it's a really artistic action figure, maybe that's kind of cool. I don't know, maybe a little bit. If you're driving around a Batmobile, a lot of guys will think, dude, that's a noteworthy car. It will not get you the girl, but the guys will think you're pretty cool. Um, but yeah, the other thing is it's very, very, very branded on being childish. And I think that's both fair and unfair. And I'll just give the controversial part first. The part that's fair about that is eh, I think superheroes are largely, first of all, they're largely a guy fantasy. It isn't that we want to be large and powerful. It's actually, I think, bear with me for this one for a moment. It isn't that we're dreaming of being the Hulk and killing everything or just smashing everything in our path. It's not anything like that. It's what's happening is I think it's essentially a metaphor for a boy growing into a man. In other words, there were things where your world was very circumscribed and controlled up to a certain point, and then at a certain point, you got a growth spurt. You became, you started having some muscles. You started having some ability to see over the counter and do things, and suddenly the world opens up for you in a really big way, and you've got a lot more ability to exert your effect upon the world. And so when you talk about someone like Spider-Man or Batman or things like that, it's a perfect metaphor for what a boy is doing when he's trying to grow into his own power as he becomes an adult. And very famously, there's the quote of like, "With great power comes great responsibility," because you start realizing the conflicts that will arise and the sorts of problems that, as you grow into your ability to do new things, you'll realize there are people who do new things, but they're awful about. They're the bad guys. They're the villains. They're the people who use their ability to push people around, and force people to bad effect. And you learn that the good people are the people who stand against them. You knew that innately, but you also it requires a certain amount of character, of will, of courage to throw yourself into the fight. You want to think I would be the kind of guy who, if someone was beating up someone smaller than me, that I would be the kind of guy who would stop that. I would defend the weak. You want to take courage from the lessons you've got here you see from all your superheroes, and also at the same time learn to the idea of like playing on a team, even though you have different personalities. I mean, what is every team comic book other than that? The idea of that your powers can be used both for good, or that you can overdo it and you can cause great damage. Every superhero comic book has that as an underlying theme on the whole thing. And then as the villains, you only have someone who has a great deal of smarts or a great deal of power or a really cool thing like that, and uses it for something bad that maybe gets them something they want in the short term, but which identifying with the hero, unless you're a psychopath, that you want to stand against in your adult life. Well, the problem with all that, I mean, and I think it counts for why guys especially really relate to this stuff, because again, it's something that we all need to go through. But by the time we're 20 or 30, we've gone through it. It's we don't have the same problems as a 25-year-old that we did as a 12-year-old. At that point, hopefully, we've gotten it down, and so For most people, they grow out of comic books. They say, "Okay, that was nice. It was fun," and they put them aside at a certain point. The rest of us, the guys who listen to this podcast right now, at some point we said, "No, man, there was something I really liked about that part of me that was reading comic books. There was something I really liked about the art. There was something that was exciting about the story and the situations and things like that. I don't want to let it go just now. I want to keep going with something." Now, and at that point, we do a lot of things. We branch out. We realize there's life beyond superheroes. There's fantasy, there's horror, there's all sorts of different comic books that get into things that are quite a bit different than like the basic stories of Batman versus the Green, Batman versus Clayface, or Spider-Man versus the Green Goblin. We realize that there's a lot more to it. We also It's almost like a record collector who finds a band that had a really hot, song and everything, but I'm the true fan. The true fan will go find, the things before they were popular and the things after they were popular and learn all the ins and outs of the band with the different members who shifted to other bands and things like that. And you'll absolutely learn the history. Fans of comics will do absolutely the same thing with every character that ever appeared in anything. At that point, it becomes fascinating how the whole world the comic book, characters are in is held together. We'll pay attention to the lesser known comic books. We'll get really interested in how, yeah, the writer on this thing went over to a big run on this other character I liked. Let me follow that one for a while, see where that one pans out, and so forth. We'll learn, the things that we like on, appreciating both as the art form and as also the efforts of all the creators. For us, it becomes like a really big Uber story, which is utterly opaque to people who are normies. I mean, normies who just think, "Oh, yeah, the Hulk does this. He smashes things. Iron Man has the cool blaster things. He flies." Those guys don't get what we're getting at that point. They've dialed out. They've left the field behind, and so they're looking at us like we're crazy people. Like, we're just the kids who can't let it go. Um, and to be fair, yeah, I mean, there's some of it can't be let go. I mean, one thing that's interesting about fans, or at least people who are, who keep up with a childhood interest, because I think most of us, I mean, very few people encounter a comic book for the first time when they're 30, right? Most people encounter a comic book for the first time when they're like 5. And for the people who somehow stay in the game, who keep a hand in, who at least look into it from time to time. Maybe you went away for your 20s and 30s. Maybe you come back after you saw a really good movie and said, "Hey, let me pick up a couple of graphic novels." That does happen, and especially when you're older and you got more time to play. Especially when your kids come along, you get a chance to be a kid for the second time with them, right? But one thing that's also a continuity for all of us is, there's this weird effect. I don't know if you've noticed it yourself, and that you're always the same age in your own head, right? I mean, because there's a continuity of who you are, right? The same you who was thinking about, Spider-Man battling the Green Goblin when you were 6 years old, that guy still feels like the same guy who's worried about the expense accounts, at the company, later on. It's still you. And one of the weird things as you get older is you're periodically like, "Wait a minute, my body changed. I no longer can do this thing, or I suddenly can do that thing." It's like you're always a little surprised by it because there's always been a continuity of your own consciousness. And that guy's always the same age somehow. It's magical. And so that guy, if you really loved something as a kid, you don't want to let it go so easily. You want to stay with it unless it does something to cheese you off. And so, I mean, I think that's why we're all fans. We're still in the mix in the whole thing. But then the problem comes when, like, we realize, okay, well, we can do that in the privacy of our own homes. Like if I'm reading with my kid, you can always, if any of you have been parents, this effect that you can do things that are childish and kind of squirrely and fun and things like that. Model rockets, playing baseball, whatever the thing is, that your adult friends would consider a little bit funny. You can do that if you've got a kid in tow because it gives you a chance to play again. And that's all cool. Society looks on you just fine as long as you got the kid in tow. But if you're on your own, especially if you're in like the dating ages and you need to, like, say, "Look, I need to look cool in front of girls." Walking around with something that is going to absolutely tank your social status like that, that's a death move, and you're not going to do it. So And by the way, and who determines all these things? I mean, the funny thing is you got the guys are doing all the reading, it's 90 some percent of superhero comic fans are guys. Who are the people who determine whether or not superhero comic books are cool once you're in your teens? Girls. So it's because at a certain point we would like to be lovely in front of girls. We would like girls to think we're cool, right? And if we're not on the football team, if we're not a rock musician, if we're not one of the things that girls are going to immediately be gravitating to, if we're not, the head of the major corporation, if we're, whatever the thing is, we want to do something that a girl is going to think is neat, right? And reading a comic book is not one of those things. Matter of fact, all of us who have large comic book collections at some point have wondered what happens when this girl I'm dating comes over and sees my comic book collection for the first time. At that point, we have a number of copes. You know, not many people. I mean, look, if you found a geek girl who gets it, who's hip to the idea that comic books are more than boom, pow, smash, and things like that, who gets, who likes the boyish nature of you or whatever the thing is. And again, I'm assuming I'm talking to a largely guy audience right now. Um, but if you found a girl who is okay with that and loves you for it anyway, well, God bless. And let's face it, you're going to be one of those loyal boyfriends that ever existed. These marriages tend to do very, very well for all things considered. So, God bless. You've hit the jackpot. Carry on. You're doing well. But if you're just a guy and you're out for a date, there's going to come, and you're a comic fan, there's going to come the terrible moment when you're like, yeah, I got to show her my place. Wonder how I show off the comic collection. And at that point, you have to give some thought to the display of the item and possibly the minimization of the fact that you have 73 trillion comic books, which is going to raise alarm bells for a great many women. It's just one of those things. It's not just comic collectors, by the way. I have a friend who is one of the craziest hardcore horror film guys I've ever met. He has old playbills, from like the full, what are they called, quarter sheets or whatever else. But I mean, the old movie theater posters from like Nosferatu. I mean, like the original stuff. He has thousands, and I literally mean thousands of DVDs of horror films you've never heard from. He has signed autographs from different horror plays and things like that. His place is a walking absolute museum for horror films, and he's on a first name basis with the local theater owner. They arrange they arrange things like that. I think the guy's cool as hell because I'm also a geek. But I also, through strange coincidence, was in a circle of friends where suddenly she wanted to date, met him on some match site. It's like, oh wait, him, we know him from the horror film meetup thing, and his house is, well, when you see that, you're in for a treat. And everyone was wondering whether there was going to be another date after that date. As it turns out, there was, but it didn't last long, unfortunately. But that's something that we all kind of face because it's not something that is a status raiser amongst the normies of the world, and so that's why it's a real problem to take someone and bring them into your private world like that, and why, even though you feel like I'm doing nothing wrong, I'm reading the things I know and love. What's wrong with that? The fact that girls aren't into it is the part that's keeping you from being able to show that off as freely as you'd like, for the vast majority of us. Now, with that said, if you wanted to, the idea of the, read comic books in public day, it could work, but in I think the 11 years since they've been trying it, I think it's gone absolutely nowhere. And let's face it, if you see the pictures on the different sites that try to coordinate these together, it again looks so unnatural. I can't even tell you. But you know what might work if they could possibly arrange it is, instead of read a comic book in public day, is kiss a comic geek day. If they could make it so that some guy with a comic book in his hand was seen getting necked on by his sweetie, if that was happening, and other girls said, "Huh, what's he got going on?" and other guys could be like, "Oh hey, he's reading a comic book and it's not killing him." That might possibly change the discussion. Just a thought. If you could somehow make that work, there you got a chance. But until that day comes, I think the guys, we've adopted a number of copes. And cope number one, I say, is all right, well, hey, look, there's a comic book. I know you think it's for children, But did you know these things are worth a ton of money? And let's face it, we here at Comic Base will help you with that. We will help you document the fact that these things are worth a ton of money. Some people go further than that. They'll say not only are these things worth a ton of money, but I'm very professional in the way I handle them, and the care I take with my collection and how organized it is and things like that. It makes it more of a business kind of a proposition. Women can kind of understand the business thing. They don't really get it. You know, they think it's a little weird, a little boyish, but it's okay if there's money at the end of the day. I guess that's okay because when you're talking about the dating world, I mean, I do believe there is something to biological evolution. The theory of the whole thing, where you're looking for traits in a mate that indicate that through biology that might this might be a successful way to pass on your genes. For men, you're looking for attractiveness in the woman. There's certain proportions of hips and things like that, or like the magic ratios and things like that. But basically, men are looking for women who look cute. We're looking for women who look young. That's it's just it's kind of women can bemoan this, especially as they get out of the great years for that. But I think that's baked into the beast. Same thing goes with, and men can bemoan this about women, is there's going to be times in a woman's biology where she's going to be not able to move around much because she's having your children or someone's children, and you're going to be looking, she's going to be looking for the ability, and I think this is biological. I'm not sure what percentage it is because, like anything with humans, it's partially this, partially that. But I do think there's a real percentage that says that, yeah, no, they're looking for men who have a certain amount of masculinity that they can protect them, that they a certain amount of power they can, keep them safe within the larger group structure, and definitely that they have resources. And so one of the ways that guys will try, as soon as you find yourself suddenly in the dating pool at an older age, or where else, one of the first things every guy who's facing a divorce or just went through a divorce does, you buff up at the gym, you try to upgrade your car. If you've got a scummy apartment, you start cleaning the hell out of it, and you pose it with Architectural Digest and all sorts of other things to indicate that you're a man of status and wealth and means. It's one of these things that is useful for attracting a mate. I mean, if you could do it, you would also try to gain 3 inches and and all sorts of other things that indicate that you're more masculine and so forth. But that's beyond the abilities of biology. Although some guys are actually, there's an operation where they break your legs and transplant bone, in order to make you taller, and that's an actual thing men, certain men do in order to get taller. Certainly the old copes where you put in lifts in your shoes and things like that. That's also part of the dating game. So I mean, people will, that's the way the biology wants to play. I think it's the way the culture's gone for a million years. I don't think we're changing anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, men and women are different. Hey, there's news for you, right? But and they are looking for different things, especially when it comes to the dating pool. I mean, once you're in your own tribe of two, at that point you work out your own life. But when you're finding your own tribe of two, with your mate, at that point the way you signal that you're going to be a good match is all these other things. And honestly, doing something that comes across as childish or boyish, not one of the wins. So that is the long answer on that one. Let's see here. Yeah. So just a couple of thoughts on the whole thing. So even though we know American comic books are largely superhero based, and I do think as a long term thing for artistic storytelling, I do think something like bande dessinée, which is the I think French and Belgium graphic art storytelling, where it moves the genre way away from typical storylines into things that are more like the sorts of things we make movies about. Everything from comedies to westerns to science fiction to fantasy. The more comic books are associated with things like that, the more I think it takes down the sting of them as an item in your in as what you're reading publicly. Also, the further you move the comic you're reading publicly from the floppy, if you make it look like in a beautifully illustrated hardcover novel, it takes some of the sting off in terms of being able to be seen in public with it. That said, it's never going to be something where, like, you're sitting there on a public, transport, or public train or something like that, and you're pulling out your hardcover, Savage Sword of Conan. It's going to be rare that someone of wealth and distinction comes up to you and says, "Oh, yes, I I see you're reading the latest Howard, Robert E. Howard omnibus. I quite enjoyed that one myself. Don't hold your breath waiting for that to happen. If it happens, great, but it's not gonna be the power thing amongst most people. So, you know, keep it keep expectations low on that one. Um, the last, thoughts I wanna say on that one is, one thing I've really enjoyed since coming to Tennessee is Tennessee more than California is seems down with the idea that guys and women really are very different. I mean, it's a miracle we get together and that we all like each other. We certainly complement each other, but look, talk different things. And when the women are all together in one group, guys, you will be horrified at the discussions. It's like there is way more biology that gets talked about by women talking amongst women. You frankly don't want to be part of it if you can possibly avoid it. And women obviously are always talking about like, oh, you guys, you're just being boys, talking about your blah blah blah. And yes, guys hang out with other guys, all things considered, want to talk about utterly different things than the women do. And honestly, we don't always want to be in a mode where we can't be with our tribe of geeks, or our tribe of just other dudes, right? When that happens, it's funny, houses sometimes, you have a larger house, like a grand manor, you'd have something called a drawing room. And I used to think that drawing rooms were for drawing. It's like, wow, people were very artistic in the Victorian days, weren't they? It's like, no, it turns out drawing room is actually short for the withdrawing room. The idea being that you just had a big banquet, you just had a festival, you had some sort of entertainment which brought the men and the women together. At which point, when it was all said and done, the women would retire to the parlor or some other place like that where they can talk about girl stuff, and the guys would go to the drawing room, the withdrawing room, where they would get out the cognac and the cigars and the whiskey, whatever it was. Maybe it was a gun room back in the day, but basically, and they could talk about guy stuff. And the things that they did were going to be, talk about were going to be very different. And it's funny because the first time I really saw that dynamic where like at a certain point in the party, the guys just kind of head all one way and the girls all kind of head one way, and you kind of meet each other, when it's time to go home. First time I saw it was when I got to the South, and it's like, huh, it's oddly refreshing. It's suddenly it's like, "Oh, wait a minute, we don't need to be, in mixed company, all the time." And when you're just hanging out with guys, it's a different vibe to the whole thing. It's kinda nice sometimes because most of real life is co-ed, and sometimes it's nice to just be amongst, your guys talking guy stuff. Or, if you're, comic friends talking about comic friend stuff, if you're music geek guys talking about music geek stuff, sometimes you gotta keep the conversation general for the, general public. If someone walks in who's not a member of that tribe, you broaden it out just to be polite, but sometimes it's nice to just hang with your peeps. And that's really kind of the nice, part of that whole, dynamic. And, and I'll just close on that one where is, um, so I'm thinking about the fiasco with Bud Light, the other, with this whole thing. And it's a funny one, and I'm gonna call it the fiasco as opposed to the boycott because it is an amazing thing. So Bud Light, for most of us, was a brand without a brand. It's that beer that they sold at the ballpark. It was the cheapest option. It was okay. I went over to England, and I used first time I was over there, I'm drinking every English brew I can find, and suddenly after I walked around England for, London for a day, and I'm dead on my feet, tired, I pulled into a pub, slammed myself down, the comfy overstuffed chairs and everything, and said, pint of Guinness, and bring it over, and I heard like, oh man, they serve Guinness at like room temperature in England. Not true. It's a lie. It's cool. It's not cold. It's like 50 degrees. It's not like 33 degrees. Um, and honestly, the first time you do that and you pour down the 50-degree Guinness down your throat and it's lovely and creamy and refreshing, you're like, "Oh, I get it." Yeah, and up until that moment, you don't get it. But at that point, it's like, "Okay, the whole beer thing makes sense now." But I was talking to some Brit friends of mine over there one year, and I'm sitting there going like, "You guys have amazing stuff over here. You have Boddington, you have Fuller's, you have, every, pub has its own, special brew going on and everything. For God's sake, what are you doing drinking Bud Light?" And my one friend's, response was, "Well, I like it. It's like beer, but lighter." It's like it's like, "Oh, okay. So you're looking for beer-flavored water, so you don't fill up. Oh, okay. I guess that works." Um But with that said, Bud Light is a brand in America that doesn't really have a brand. I mean, it's like if you asked anyone 2 months ago, "Okay, so Bud Light, what do you associate with it?" Some people are like, "Is that the one with the dog or the one with the horses or what?" It's the one at the park, It's the cheap beer you got because it was okay when you want a beer and it's all they got. Yeah, like, they say it's like, "When you want a beer real bad, we got a real bad beer for you." You drank it because it was what they had. It wasn't one you went out of your way to get, but, if someone gave you one, you wouldn't, like, spit on them because it's like, "Oh, it's a beer," as you look around for something better, whatever. But in that world, which is also populated by, Busch and Coors and Miller Lite, and, there's a whole bunch of things that are in kind of the same ballpark on that one. If you're getting all frou-frou, you can get into your Stellas and your Amstels and some things that actually have a little bit of presence to them. But, these undifferentiated American lagers, up until 2 months ago, this thing essentially had no brand. No one knew what it was. And now, unfortunately, because and I'm gonna say it's because a woman was the marketing head, and I really do think it's why. And because she comes from a different world than the guys do, she thought, "Hey, we're not hitting the market share numbers we would like to get, so, we need a hip new demographic that would bring this whole thing in." And what do we got? We got a guy who dresses up as an incredibly stylized woman on his day 365 of girlhood, who is a famous gay actor on Broadway, who's a complete drama queen, in the literal sense of the whole thing. Yeah, let's make him our new brand rep. And the weird thing is, because I'm a married guy and I hang around men and I hang around women and I hang around when they're both together, I think I know what she was thinking. And I think it made sense to her because she's sitting there thinking, like, well, I'm thinking of my gay friends. They're funny, they're exciting, they're sparkly. It's a new demographic. Those guys aren't known for drinking our beer. We'll bring them in, add a little pizzazz to the old brand. And because she's never been a guy, she doesn't know that every guy from the age of about when they knew that there were girls, or actually probably a number of years before that, the things that make you a useful guy, a powerful guy, a masculine guy are all the things you want to avoid with that branding. It's like, it's like again, I was sitting there going like, I'm expressing opinions on fashion. And like you almost have to say not gay right before it, and again, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like you say, look, I can say something about art. I can say something about artistic sensibilities or things that are seen as having a little bit more of a feminine role to them. But you do it at a risk to having your buddies rip you a bit and say, "Hey, well, a little light in the loafers there, man." It's like, or whatever else. But that's something that just guys do to each other. They just rip on each other about the whole thing because one of the ways that you kind of prove you're a member of the tribe is, on some basic level, it's like, oh, there's certain kind of bro masculine things guys just do around each other. It's like we're not like women with other women. We're like guys. We we talk crap to each other. We poke fun. If someone feels like they're getting too puffed up on themselves, we'll cut them down a peg and and see if they can take the joke, whatever the thing is. But the whole idea of saying, "Whoa, I'm not that kind of thing." That cuts pretty close to the heart of most guys' experience on everything they've got. So, what this woman, in her attempts to bring in a sparkly image, to get away from the old fratty behavior of her old crowd did, is she brought in a thing that makes every guy around get flashbacks to every time they've ever been teased about, "Wait, did I say something that someone's gonna tease me about being gay for? And now I'm gonna drink a beer that's known as the face of this transsexual guy?" It's like, "Oh, dear Lord, no." So, just out of curiosity, because this thing had been going on for a couple weeks, and the way you bet on most boycotts is you bet, okay, whatever thing you're in a huff of, okay, it'll take a little sales hit for a couple days or a couple weeks, and then eventually the people like the brand stick with the brand because they liked it for a reason, and then you move on back. And the boycotts inevitably fizzle. I mean, you never count on a boycott having legs. But I think what this marketing head of Bud managed to inadvertently do by bringing in essentially most guys, psychic worst nightmare to a beer that essentially had no brand before, is she finally gave the beer a brand, and it's now the tranny brand. And that's the last beer that any guy who especially has 4 or 5 other choices of tasteless water-flavored beer available to them at the same price. That's the last thing a guy wants. So I'm watching the beer stands at Pensacola, Blue Wahoo Stadium, and I'm just out of curiosity, I'm realizing, okay, we kinda get a little hip to the situation of the corporate ownership and thinking, actually about half the beer here is owned in one way or another by Anheuser AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch InBev, because, even though Bud Light's the one who went all in with the Dylan Mulvaney thing, it's like, well, Busch Beer is also owned by them, and so is Stella and some other things like that. But I mean, the whole brand of Stella was like, we are the hoity-toity, we're basically the new Amstel. We're the hoity-toity, kind of European light beer. It's like, okay, so when you want a hoity-toity European light beer, would you take the knife and you flick the head off the top and you hand it to a very cultured customer like that, and the rest of us go and sit there and say, wait a minute, you're serving me an 11.2-ounce beer and not a 12 or 16-ounce beer for the same price. That's the beef most of us have with Stella. But anyway, but you took that whole thing and suddenly you're like, wait a minute, if I'm gonna buy a Bud Light at the stadium, suddenly people are gonna be looking at me like I'm weird or I just feel uncomfortable now, and I'm gonna drink anything else. And so I was looking around at this entire baseball stadium thinking, what if I went buying Bud Light? So I'm looking around just what drinks are in people's hands, and the entire stadium, I managed to see 2 people. I'm not saying there weren't more than 2, but of everyone I looked at, there were 2 people who had bought a Bud Light at the entire thing. One was a middle-aged woman, the other one was like a 70-year-old dude. And everyone else is like, I think they'd rather drink a Pepsi, than drink a Bud Light, which was funny because I guess Clay Travis, the guy from Outkick, he set out on this last weekend. He set a big ass cooler with just a bunch of free beer, all different types and every the whole thing. And it was just like, okay, guys, free beer, take what you want. And he took a picture at the start of the day and the end of the day. And the start of the day is all different types of beer in the cooler. And the end of the day, it's just all the Bud Light cans swimming alone by themselves because people picked all around to grab any other beer except for the Bud Light. So yeah, Lord only knows about the future, but I think inadvertently, I think this marketing lady stepped into it, and I think she stepped into it literally because she's a woman. It's because she hadn't had the experience of being a guy and knowing what it's like growing up as a guy and the things that guys tease each other about and things like that. And she just, I think in her head, it all made complete sense. It was just opening up a new market, and wow, I think I think she's unfortunately managed to brand her beer in the worst possible way. So I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I'm going to say, at least in my limited experience, this was not great for them. But I also, just to bring the whole thing back, is I do think it talks to the power of social pressure to, even if there's something that you do kind of like, you won't do it in public if it's going to cost you status. And I think, unfortunately, she's managed to do that with Budweiser. Um, Anyway, that's gonna park it for me for the night because I've been going on for quite a while. I appreciate you all hanging in with me. The whole thing is, it's been a bit of a ramble. It's been a lot of a ramble, but hopefully I think some of it's been interesting at least. But anyway, so that's about it, and hope you all do well. We'll see you on the next one. We'll probably talk about things that are much more straight and comic based related because we can build new builds now, and we'll see you on the next one. You take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.